Now, let us move on to a very special opening this morning and our guest keynote speaker, Dr. David Suzuki. And to help me do that, I'd like to call to the stage Ross Leonard, who is Director of Architecture and Design Marketing for Collins and Aikman Floor Covering. This made possible this keynote presentation, a long-standing member of the Council. Thank you, Ross.
Good morning, and thank you, Christine. My coworkers and friends in Canada are extremely envious of me this morning. First of all, I get to spend a few days in this really impressive city. It's the first time I've been to Austin, a city known for incubating such great musical talent. And as we all know, Canadians have a real love and affinity for music. You think of all the recording artists that have come out of Canada recently. Celine Dion, Shania Twain, Katie Lang, one of my favorites, and of course, how can you forget about William Shatner? I tell you, if you don't have William Shatner singing the Beatles' greatest hits album, your collection's really not complete. But anyways, more importantly, and second, they're envious because I have the opportunity to introduce Dr. David Suzuki, who really has become an icon in Canada and is quickly being adopted by countries all around the world. David Suzuki, PhD, is the chair of the David Suzuki Foundation, an award-winning scientist and an environmentalist and broadcaster. David has received consistently high acclaim for his 30 years of award-winning work in broadcasting, explaining the complexities of science in a compelling and easily understood way for people like me. He is well known to millions as the host of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's popular science television series, The Nature of Things. His 8-part series, A Planet for the Taking, won an award from the United Nations. His 8-part PBS series, The Secret of Life, was praised internationally, as was his 5-part series, The Brain, for the Discovery Channel. An internationally respected geneticist, Dr. Suzuki was a full professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver from 1969 until his retirement in 2001. He is a professor emeritus with UBC's Sustainable Development Research Institute. From 1969 to 1972, he was the recipient of the prestigious EWR Stacey Memorial Fellowship Award for the Outstanding Canadian Research Scientist under the age of 35. Dr. Suzuki has received numerous awards for his work, including a UNESCO Prize for Science, a United Nations Environment Program Medal, and the Order of Canada. He has 15 honorary degrees from universities in Canada, the United States, and Australia. For his work in support of Canada's First Nations people, Dr. Suzuki has received many tributes and has been honored with 5 names and formal adoption by 2 tribes. The author of more than 30 books, Dr. Suzuki is recognized as a world leader in sustainable ecology. He lives with his wife, Dr. Tara Cullis, and 2 children in Vancouver. He also received his PhD in zoology from the University of Chicago in 1961. So please join me in welcoming Dr. David Suzuki.
Thank you very much. That was far too long and too generous an introduction, but I'm delighted to be here, to have the chance to be part of your inaugural annual convention, and I'm absolutely knocked out, as I know everyone else is, by the oversubscription here, the enormous attendance. Congratulations. I think this is a very exciting beginning for this organization. This is where I believe you are where the action is today on issues of the environment. In Canada, some of you may know there is a furious debate going on over whether Canada should ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Our Prime Minister has indicated he's going to introduce ratification to Parliament in December, and Alberta, which is Canada's counterpart to Texas, has launched a very vigorous multi-million-dollar campaign to try to prevent this from being approved by Parliament. But meanwhile, as this terribly divisive and I think totally unnecessary exercise is going on, individuals, companies, municipalities are getting on with the process of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Not necessarily for doing something about climate change, but because it makes good economic sense. They are building or retrofitting spaces that are aesthetically delightful, that reduce waste and save money. You're the ones that are doing it. I congratulate you. I have nothing to teach you. I just say, Godspeed, get on with it as rapidly as you can. What I would like to do in the time I have is to provide you with a big picture, a context, perhaps, within which to consider the activity that you're involved with. What today are the media telling us are the important things in our lives? Well, of course, terrorism, the war in the Middle East, snipers, celebrities, sports, and of course, everything is subsumed by economics. And we've already had the welcomers here mentioning the economic downturn and how this is affecting people around across this country. Over and over again, we seem to be hypnotized by the mantra that the bottom line is the economy. We can't afford to do anything unless the economy is strong. In Canada, we've been told for a decade now, you've got to sacrifice for the sake of the economy. Your community has to give up social services for the sake of the economy. I was told by an environment minister that we can't afford to do anything to protect the environment if we don't have a strong, growing economy. You know, a few hundred years ago, during the Dark Ages, we had monsters and demons that everybody cringed at and sacrificed virgins for to try to appease. Well, we don't have virgins to sacrifice now, but today this monster has come back to haunt us and torment us, and that is the economy. And we tremble before the economy and whether it's going to go up or down. We seem to feel that the economy is the source of everything that matters. And if it isn't constantly growing, then we're in deep trouble. But in our concern with steady growth, which has come now to be equated with progress, no one ever asks, how much is enough? Or is there anything outside of economics? As a biologist, I have never understood this equation of economic growth with progress. The belief that the economy can and must grow forever, or the notion that everything that matters flows from the economy. My puzzlement is based on the fact that we are first and foremost biological creatures. We are animals. And as animals, that reality determines some fundamental needs. The needs that are satisfied completely by the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where life exists. It is the biosphere that gives us everything that we need and that makes an economy possible. Just look at this immense building here in this room. Everything in it, from the invisible air to the glass, the metal, the plastic, the wood, everything in this room has come from the earth. And when we're finished with it, it will go back into the earth. It's the earth that makes us possible, our survival, and that makes economists and an economy possible. The biosphere is fixed and finite. It can't grow any bigger than it is. How then can anything within a system that is finite aspire to endless growth and expect to survive? As Paul Ehrlich, the ecologist at Stanford, says, steady growth forever is the creed of the cancer cell and economists. And the end result of steady growth in both situations will be the same. It's death. There is a far more profound bottom line that we are ignoring at our peril because it's necessary to protect it for our very survival. Remember, long before there was ever a formal economy or economists or even businesses, human beings flourished and lived rich, full lives. But before I tell you what I believe the real bottom line is, I have to explain how I arrived at this. After all, I'm just a geneticist. I graduated as a hotshot licensed geneticist in 1961, and I was determined to make a name in my area. And as I set out on a career as a geneticist, I was totally derailed by a woman. This has happened over and over again in my life. In this case, it was not a bad thing. My great regret is that I never met her. Her name was Rachel Carson, but she had as great an effect on my life as any woman I've ever known. In 1962, just as I became an assistant professor of genetics, Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring. And Silent Spring changed the way that I looked at the world. Because what she pointed out was that in nature, everything is connected to everything else. Nothing exists separate or in isolation. So you pull at a strand of the fabric of life on Earth here, and the effect of that ripples throughout the entire web. So yes, we're a very clever species. We can create chemicals that kill insects and spray to kill pests. But in nature, everything is interconnected. You spray here to kill bugs, and it ripples through the web, and you affect fish and birds and human beings. Because of Rachel Carson's book, I, like millions of people around the world, was swept up in what we now recognize was the beginning of the environmental movement. In British Columbia, the kinds of issues that I became involved in was, one of the first issues was the American proposal to test nuclear weapons at Amchitka in the Aleutian Islands off Alaska. And that ultimately, the protest against that, although you went ahead and blew them up anyway, but the protest led to the creation of Greenpeace in Vancouver. I testified as part of the protest against offshore drilling in Hecate Strait off the coast of British Columbia, and we successfully stopped that. I testified to stop a mega dam at Site C on the Peace River. We continue to protest to this day against clear-cut logging and air and water pollution from our pulp mills. And as I was swept up in this movement during the 60s, the way I looked at the environmental problem was simple. Human beings are taking too much stuff out of the environment and putting too much waste and toxic material back into it. So in my way of looking at it, the solution was also simple. Regulate how much and what we are allowed to remove from the environment, and regulate how much and what we are allowed to put back in, and then enforce the regulations. So in addition to lobbying, or to blockading and protesting, many of us were lobbying politicians in Victoria and Ottawa, asking them to enact laws to protect the air, the water, the soil, and endangered species, and to set up the infrastructure, Ministry of the Environment and so on, to enforce the regulations. But by the early 70s, for me, it became crystal clear this approach of environmentalism simply wouldn't work. And the reason is that our knowledge of how the world works is too limited to be able to regulate our interaction with it. Let me give you a couple of examples. DDT was first synthesized by organic chemists in the 1800s. It wasn't until the 1930s that a chemist named Paul Mueller, working for Geigy in Switzerland, discovered that DDT kills insects. And right away, Geigy recognized an enormous opportunity and trumpeted the imminent conquest of some of the great pestilences that have plagued humankind since the beginning of time. Through chemistry, we would now come to control these great pests. It was considered a great discovery. Indeed, Paul Mueller won a Nobel Prize for his discovery in 1948. And so, Geigy made a lot of money. We began to use millions and millions of pounds of DDT. But it wasn't until years later that bird watchers began to notice something funny was happening with birds. Biologists then began to track it down and discovered a phenomenon that had never been known before. It's called biomagnification. You spray in parts per million into the environment. Microorganisms absorb the DDT. They're not killed by it. They are eaten by bigger organisms. And at each trophic level up the food chain, you concentrate the DDT many times. So by the time you end up in the fatty tissue of the shell glands of birds or the breasts of women, you have concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. How could we have regulated DDT when it was first found to be an insecticide, when we didn't even know there was a phenomenon called biomagnification until eagles began to disappear and biologists tracked it down. CFCs, once again, the chemistry industry touted this great discovery. CFCs are complex ring molecules, but they don't interact chemically. They're inert. So right away, there was this huge opportunity. If you have an aerosol spray can, you put your active ingredients into the spray can, but then you've got a lot more space, so you fill it up with CFCs. CFCs don't interact with anything, so you can top it up and everything is fine. And we thought, wow, that's a great idea. Began to use millions and millions of pounds of CFCs, and only years later it was discovered that CFCs, because they don't react chemically, they persist. They don't break down as rapidly. They float around, and eventually in the upper atmosphere, ultraviolet light from the sun breaks chlorine-free radicals off the CFCs, and chlorine-free radicals are potent destroyers of ozone. When scientists announced that CFCs were destroying ozone, most of us didn't even know there was an ozone layer up there to destroy. So how could we possibly have regulated CFCs before we had used them, when we didn't even know what the long-term impacts would be? And mark my words, as a geneticist, I absolutely assure you that all the hype around biotechnology and genetically modified organisms cannot obscure the reality that this is a revolutionary area. Our knowledge about what we're doing when we manipulate pieces of DNA is absolutely primitive, and it would be absolutely extraordinary if there aren't surprises in store for us from genetic engineering, as we've found with DDT and CFCs. So for me as a scientist, the dilemma was, we can't put the brakes on science. We are not going to be able to stop technological innovation. But how are we going to be able to manage these technologies as we go into a future more and more burdened with the enormous impact of science and technology? And for me, the problem became much different in the late 1970s, when I decided to do a television program on a battle over logging in the Queen Charlotte Islands off the west coast of British Columbia. Queen Charlotte Islands, what the native people call Haida Gwaii, is an archipelago extending off the Alaskan Panhandle down the west coast of Canada. And for years there had been a major battle going on with McMillan Blodell over the clear-cut logging on the islands. So I flew up there to do a show, and I interviewed loggers and forest company executives, politicians, environmentalists. And one of the people I interviewed was a young Haida carver, an artist who had led the battle for many years. His name is Gujau. He's now the president of the Haida Nation. And when I interviewed him, I said, listen, Gujau, you've got over 80% unemployment in your community. A lot of the loggers are Haida. So it's bringing economic benefits to your community. Why are you objecting to the logging? And he said, sure, we can cut the trees down and we'll still be here. But once we've cut the trees down, we won't be Haida anymore. We'll just be like everybody else. And when he said that, I was so busy trying to be sure I asked all the questions, it went right over my head. And it was only when I got back to Vancouver and began to look at the rushes that I realized he had opened a window on a radically different way of looking at the world. What he was saying in his simple words was that to the Haida, they don't end at their skin or their fingertips. Being Haida means being connected to the land in a very profound way. The air, the water, the rocks, the trees, the fish, the birds, all of that is what make the Haida the people they are. The land, they say, embodies their history, their culture. The very reason why Haida are on this earth is told to them by their connection with the land. And ever since Gujau opened that window on this way of looking at the world, I've been a student traveling to many parts of the world and meeting indigenous people. And everywhere I find the stories are different, but the basic lesson is the same. I've been to Papua New Guinea, to Borneo, to the Kalahari and Madagascar and the Amazon, the Arctic, everywhere, Aboriginal people tell us that the earth is our mother. And they tell us that we are created out of the earth by the four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And I realized, as I've learned from these indigenous people, that we framed the environmental problem the wrong way. There is no environment out there and we are here. We literally are the environment. We don't manage our interaction with it. Whatever we do to the environment, we're doing directly to ourselves. Because we are created by the earth. We are made of the four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And I don't mean that in a poetic or a metaphoric way. I mean that in the most profound, scientifically verifiable way. We are made of the very stuff of the planet. Let me just show you what I mean. When we, each of us, left our mother's body at birth, what was the very first thing that we needed to survive? It was a breath of air. And from that first breath until our very last gasp on our deathbed, we need air 14 to 40 times a minute. We need air. When you breathe air in, you suck it deep into the most warm, moist, intimate part of your bodies, your lungs. When you look at the structure of the lungs, they're filled with tiny capsules called alveoli. And we've got about 300 million alveoli in our lungs. We need that many capsules to give the surface area to come in contact with the air. If you flattened out all 300 million alveoli in your lungs, they would cover a tennis court. That's the area that is all wrinkled up into your lungs. Each alveolus is lined by a 3-layered membrane called a surfactant. The surfactant reduces surface tension, so when the air comes into contact with it, it immediately sticks. It fuses to the surfactant. Carbon dioxide rushes out, oxygen rushes in, and then when we exhale, we don't breathe everything in our lungs out again. If we did that, our lungs would collapse. About half of the air in your lungs stays in your lungs. The point is, you can't draw a line and say the air ends here and I begin there. There is no line. We are the air. We are the air in the most profound way. It's in us and stuck to us. And of course, the air that comes out of my nose and your nose immediately mixes in the room and goes straight up everybody else's nose. Air is not an empty space or a vacuum. Air is a physical substance that embeds us in it. I know that Americans love the image of John Wayne riding tall in the saddle, the rugged individualist. Nonsense. There is no such thing as a rugged individualist. We're stuck together in a matrix of air. We're sharing that air not only with all people around the world, we're sharing it with birds and trees and worms and snakes. We are embedded in a matrix of air together with all other terrestrial life forms. There's a wonderful thought exercise that Harlow Shapley, an American astronomer, performed many years ago. He said, let's follow a single breath of air and see what happens to it. Well, how do you do that? 19% of the air is oxygen. The reason we need air every minute of our lives is that oxygen rushes into our bodies and fuels our metabolic fires. So you take a breath in, a lot of the oxygen rushes into our bodies, and it never comes out again. 80% of the air is nitrogen. Nitrogen, we breathe it in, it rushes into our bodies. Some of it reacts biochemically and stays in our body. And so when we breathe out, some of it remains in us. But 1% of the air is an element called argon. And if you remember your chemistry lesson, argon belongs to a group of elements called the noble gases, the inert gases. And I guess they're noble because they don't react chemically with anything. So you breathe it in, argon goes into your body. You breathe it out comes the same amount of argon. So argon is a very nice marker, something you can follow that breath of air through. How many argon atoms are there in one original breath? Shapley calculates there are about 3 times 10 to the 18th. That's 3 followed by 18 zeros. That's a shitload of argon. That's a lot of argon. Okay? So let's follow the 3 times 10 to the 18th argon atoms. You breathe out, Very quickly, it mixes through convection with the air in this room, and every one of us will be breathing gazillions of argon atoms from one original breath. The door opens, out that argon rushes across Texas, across the United States, around the world, and according to Shapley, 1 year later, if we all came back into this room, every breath you take would have about 15 argon atoms from that one original breath a year ago. So based on that calculation, Shapley calculates that every breath we take has millions of argon atoms that were once in the bodies of Joan of Arc and Jesus Christ. That every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were in the bodies of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That every breath we take will suffuse life forms as far as we can see into the future. So air is this, I call it a sacred element. Air gives life to all of us, and it connects us seamlessly with the past, the present, and into the future. Now, our great boast is that we're different from other species because we're intelligent. Oh, we're smart, we're clever. But what intelligent creature, knowing that air is a sacred substance that gives life to all terrestrial forms, would proceed to use air as a toxic dump and act as if somehow it's not going to be a problem? We are the air, and whatever we do to the air, we're doing directly to ourselves. Now, I'm 66 years old. I reckon at my age, I have taken well over 350 million breaths. That means I've sucked 1 to 4 liters of air into my body and filtered whatever is in it. So do we think we can just dump stuff into the air, use it as a toxic dump, and not have it affect us? You know, if you reduced the earth to the size of a basketball, the atmosphere would be a fraction of a layer of the thickness of one sheet of saran wrap. That's all the atmosphere. Julie Payette, a Canadian astronaut, told me this, expressed it in a wonderful way. She said, you know, when you're in a capsule way above the earth, you go around the earth every hour and a half. That's 16 times a day. You see the sunrise and sunset. And every time you see a sunrise and sunset, you see that thin layer along the along the horizon. And that's the atmosphere. This tiny layer. And the astronauts are hundreds of kilometers above that. This thin layer is only 10, 12 kilometers deep. And that's everything. Below that is life. Above that is vacuum. There's nothing. It's this thin sheet. And I was shocked to arrive in Austin yesterday and see that you've got brown air hanging over my God, I thought the thing that Texas had was space. But even a city like this, when I was going to high school in the 1950s, my physics professor taught us air is an odorless, colorless, invisible gas. Most of us who live in cities haven't seen that kind of air in a long time. Whatever we do to the air, we do to ourselves. In Canada, 1 out of every 5 children born today will grow up and develop asthma. When I was growing up in the 40s, we never even heard the word asthma. The first person I ever met with asthma was in college. Today, you can't go into a primary school class and not find all kinds of kids with puffers. Well, what do we think's happening? Our own children, for heaven's sakes, have finally become the canaries in the coal mine. They're telling us something is fundamentally wrong. And we continue to act as though the solution for asthma is better puffers and drugs. Whatever we do to the air, we do to ourselves because we are air. We are water. Well, nothing could be more obvious. Every one of us is at least 60% water by weight. I mean, we're basically a big blob of water with enough organic thickener added so we don't dribble away on the floor. The problem, of course, is that our bodies leak water all the time. It's coming out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch. We're losing water all the time. And the amazing thing is our bodies know that. We don't have a big gauge saying water level that we have to keep checking. Our bodies are figuring it out all the time. If we drank 1 milliliter of water more a day than we lose, in a matter of weeks we'd blow up. If we drank 1 milliliter of water less a day than we lose, we'd shrivel away. But we don't, because our bodies are constantly monitoring water levels in ourselves and saying, listen, you've got too much water, get to the can, or you're running low, you're getting pretty thirsty. So we keep our water levels very constant. And when I take a drink of water, do you think this is Austin water or wherever it happens to be made? This is Fort Worth. Do you think this is Fort Worth water? I mean, the first science lesson I remember from grade school was the water cycle. Water covers 71% of the planet, evaporates, forms clouds, rains on the land, runs into rivers and lakes, evaporates. Water cartwheels around the planet. Water is like air. It's a connector. It's a glue that links us all together. Every drink we take has water that is evaporated off the canopy of the Amazon rainforest, out of all of the oceans of the world, off the grasslands of Canada. Water is a glue that holds us together. We say we're intelligent. What intelligent creature, knowing that we are water, would then proceed to use water as a toxic dump and act as if it's not going to affect us? We are the earth in the most profound way, because almost everything that we eat for our nutrition grew in the soil. Children today are shocked when I tell them every bit of the food that you eat, your nutrition, was once living. We're basically a compost heap for the carcasses of plants and animals that we consumed for dinner last night. And when you take that other being into your mouth, we tear it apart and absorb the molecules in those cells into our own bodies and become made by those plants and animals. We are the earth through the food that we eat. We say we're intelligent. What intelligent creature, knowing that we are created by the earth, would use the soil as a toxic dump? Indeed, we spray toxic chemicals directly onto the plants and animals that we're going to eat, and act as if somehow we can manage it safely. And finally, we are fire. What makes life on this planet possible is energy. And every bit of the energy in our bodies that allows us to move, to grow, to reproduce, every bit of that energy is sunlight. When we burn that energy, we're releasing the sun's energy into our bodies and using it. Sunlight captured by plants through the process of photosynthesis. And every bit of the fuel that we use to liberate energy was made by sunlight. Plants capture sunlight and eventually accumulate in the earth as fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, or continue to survive today as peat and wood. All of that, fuel, is stored energy from the sun. We are fire in the most profound way. And the ultimate miracle on this planet is that life, this web of living things, what biologists call biodiversity, creates, cleanses, and renews these four sacred elements: earth, air, fire, and water. It was plants that created the atmosphere we depend on. When they discovered photosynthesis, they began to remove the high levels of carbon dioxide in the air, and in the process of capturing sunlight and converting it into energy and sugars, they released oxygen as a byproduct. They transformed the atmosphere into the oxygen-rich one that we depend on, and to this very day, it's all the green things in the world that are exchanging carbon dioxide for oxygen. The problem we face today with climate change is that by liberating these massive deposits of carbon in the soil and fossil fuels, ever since the Industrial Revolution, we have been liberating more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than plants can remove. We now are creating 50% more CO2 than the atmosphere, twice as much CO2 as the atmosphere can absorb. And so it's accumulated. We now have 30% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we had 150 years ago. And at the rate we're going, we will more than double the concentration before the end of this century. That's what everybody is excited about and concerned about in terms of global warming or climate change. And that's what your president has said you're not going to do anything about in terms of any kind of formal commitment to targets and reduction. Well, we are Earth beings, and what we do to the atmosphere and the consequences are going to reverberate heavily on us and the way that we live. The biodiversity on the planet filters the water so that we can drink it. In Vancouver, I claim we have the best water in the world because we have 3 watersheds surrounded by old-growth rainforest. When it rains, the tree roots and other plant roots, soil fungi and microorganisms filter that water for us. We don't have to do a thing but drink it at the end. It's life that creates the soil that we depend on. Before there was any life on Earth, there was no soil anywhere on the planet. And to this day, the biodiversity on the Earth generates the soil in which we grow our food. And of course, it's biodiversity that captures all of the energy that we need to survive. To me, this then must be the bottom line. Air, water, soil, sunlight, and the web of living things that delivers them to us must be the foundation on which we build the way we live. Those are sacred and ought to be protected above everything else. It doesn't make sense that we've created something called an economy that must come before everything else. We can't deny our biological nature. We're more, though, than just biological beings. We are also social creatures. And what I'm giving you now is the thinking that has gone into a television series called The Sacred Balance, which has just been broadcast in Canada and will be broadcast on the entire PBS network next year sometime. What I showed was that as biological creatures, we need earth, air, fire, and water and biodiversity, but we are social beings as well. And as social creatures, the amazing thing is the most profound need we have to be fully human is love. Now, before you dismiss me as some guy that's flipped off into some hippy-dippy trip, I mean that in the most profound, scientifically demonstrable way. We need love in order to be fully human. And the way that we did it was to look at the grotesque experiments that have inadvertently been performed by human beings, where children have survived, but survived without the opportunity for unstinting love. We looked at what happened in Cambodia under the Reign of Terror, in Rwanda during the terrible massacres, in Bosnia and in Romania. In Romania, we followed children who grew up in Ceausescu's orphanages, who were fed, clothed, and sheltered, but never held or kissed or talked to. And what you find are children who are fundamentally crippled psychically and physically. They die. They die like flies. We need love to know how to love, to be fully human and become a part of the human community. So if we are going to build a sustainable world in which we maximize our human potential, we have to create communities in which we maximize the opportunity for love. And that means strong families and strong communities. That means as well that we have to address issues of hunger and poverty. Today we have unprecedented levels of wealth in countries like Canada and the United States. And yet we continue to say we've got to have more. Go to Dallas. Look at some of the suburbs being built there. They're being built with 4 to 6 car garages. They're immense castles. And no one's asking how much is enough. At the same time that half of the human beings on earth, according to James Wolfenson, president of the World Bank, 3 billion people on earth struggle to survive on $2 or less a day. There's something fundamentally wrong. If we don't address issues of hunger and poverty, we won't be able to protect the world or our surroundings. I always say if someone's starving and they come across an edible plant or animal, they're not going to stop and say, I wonder if this is endangered. They're going to kill it and eat it. I would. So if we don't deal with hunger and poverty, forget the environment. If we don't deal with chronic unemployment, and I work a lot with Indian tribes along the west coast of British Columbia, where they have 85-90% unemployment. If we don't deal with chronic high levels of unemployment, forget the environment. They're desperate. We've got to deal with the need for security and justice, for equity and freedom from oppression and war and terror. These are all issues that, to me, are fundamental to the global ecological crisis, and that we need to do something about to have truly sustainable communities. And finally, we have another layer of needs that I believe should also be the bottom line, and that is we are profoundly spiritual beings. And as spiritual animals, we need desperately in these times spirit. We need to know that we're not top dog, that we have this to run it and control it. We need to have a sense that we're a part of nature, that we emerged from it, and it will continue after each of us dies. We need to have sacred places and sacred spaces, and that is certainly an area where there is much to come from your particular interests and activities. These then are what I would suggest are the bottom line on which we build the way that we live. Our homes, our businesses, and our economies must be built on protecting earth, air, fire, water, biodiversity, the need for love, and the need for spirit. Today, this is not rocket science. This is nothing new. People have always understood since the beginning of time that we are a part of nature. Our dances, our songs, and our rituals celebrated the Creator and what we had received, and reaffirmed our responsibility to act properly, to keep it all going. People have always known that nothing in the world exists separate or in isolation, but we have forgotten that today. We can no longer see the exquisite connectedness, and there are a number of things that encourage that shattering of the world around us. First of all, in 1900, most people in the world lived in agricultural village communities. There were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people, and the biggest city was London with 6.5 million people. Today, way over half of all human beings, well over that in the industrialized world, live in big cities. There are over 400 cities now with more than 1 million people. We live in a human-created environment where it's easy to think we don't need nature. We're so smart, we create our own habitat. We need reminders that we are still biological beings and that we are still deeply embedded on the services that nature performs for us. Cities are a great disconnector, but we've got to create cities that are different, that are constantly reaffirming our dependence on nature and our need to act the right way. Science, I believe, focuses on bits and pieces and shatters the world because we only look at it through these fractured lenses. And this so-called information superhighway shatters our world even more because what you get are bits and pieces and we no longer see the whole context. You know, I'm an avid radio listener for my news. I get it from CBC in Canada, 6 o'clock news, a half-hour program. In a half hour, they usually run about 20 items. So that means the reports generally run about 15 to 40 seconds long. When the announcer says, "Tonight we bring you an in-depth report," he's talking about a 2-minute report. So what happens in a half-hour news report? All these items come flying at you. Violence in Bosnia, a hurricane in the Caribbean, a flood in Bangladesh. There is no time for you to know, why does this matter? Why is this news? What caused this event? And why should we care? What can we do about it? They're just little fragmented bits and pieces. We sit back. We're disempowered to do anything. So basically it's just entertainment. We live in a shattered world in which we no longer see the connections, which means if you don't have any interconnectedness, there's nothing we can do anyway. But the ultimate disconnector, I believe, is the global economy that all of our political leaders are running after. I was very, very impressed with the mayor of Austin, who said that he knows that when you run after a company from Silicon Valley and bring them to Austin, they're going to be subjected to the vagaries of the economy. And when things go bad, they're just as likely to fire hundreds of people and move out. That's the problem of the global economy. When your head office is somewhere else, they don't give a damn for local ecosystems or local communities. But economics, as we are now practicing it, is fundamentally disconnected from the real world. Hazel Henderson, an economist, a futurist in Florida, is very fond of saying conventional economics is a form of brain damage. And she's absolutely right. And this is what we're all running after. And you know, when you carry out your projects, economics is always right there determining whether or not this makes sense. Well, a few years ago I realized I was taking spending a lot of time talking about economics when I was asked to speak about the environment. Well, I don't know a damn thing about economics. So I thought, gee, maybe I better learn at least a bit of the jargon so I could impress people with what I know about economics. So I told my wife, I think I better audit a course at UBC in economics. So the first day I was quite excited about going to a course, and my wife said, Suzuki, why don't you try listening for the entire lecture? Don't say a word, just listen. Maybe, okay. I will listen the whole. Well, halfway through the lecture, what did he do? Up came a slide of the economy. And it was really impressive. You know, economists love these complicated slides because it looks very scientific. Economics, just because they get a Nobel Prize, they think it's a science. It's bullshit. It's not a science. It's a set of values posing as a science. But the more, computer analyses and equations you can get in there, the more official it looks. Well, this was the economy. And raw materials, extraction, processing, manufacturing, wholesale, retail, all that stuff with arrows going back and forth. And the reason they like to put this down is if you know all of the components of an economy, then you can tweak it with an incentive here or disincentive there, and you can manage the economy. Well, sure enough, the arm had a life of its own. It went up. I tried to stop, but it went up. I said, excuse me, sir, in that slide, where do you put the ozone layer? Where do you put deep underground aquifers of fossil water? Where do you put topsoil or biodiversity? And his answer was, there must be an economist or two here. Oh, those are externalities. What that means is those are not in the economic equation. They've got nothing to do with economics. Well, if you externalize the real world, you might as well be on Mars because it's got nothing to do with reality. So economics renders externalities nature. There's a group of ecological economists who are asking, what is the value of the services nature performs? In other words, nature is doing all kinds of stuff for us for nothing. What would it cost us to replace what nature does for us for nothing? Well, a lot of things we could never do. We could never pollinate all of the flowering plants in the world. It's estimated that on a sunny summer day in upper New York, bees pollinate about 4 trillion flowers. Well, how the hell could we ever do that? Couldn't. But there are things, I told you in Vancouver we get our water from 3 old growth watersheds. What would it cost us in Vancouver to filter the water ourselves? You could put a dollar value on that. What would it cost us if we could do it to take carbon dioxide out of the air and put oxygen back in? So there are all of these nature's services that we could try to estimate the economic value of. And what Bob Constanza and a group of people came up with was an estimate of $35 trillion a year. That's what it would cost us to do what nature does for nothing that economists don't pay any attention to because it's an externality. Now, to put this in perspective, if you added up all of the annual GDPs of all of the countries in the world, it comes to $18 trillion. Nature produces $35 trillion of services. So Hazel is certainly right. What kind of economist would externalize something out there that's doing twice as much service than all of the economies of the planet? Now, to compound the lunacy of this creation that we've made, we let economists dictate what kind of indicators that we use to tell us how well the economy is doing. Right now, the current popular thing is the GDP, the gross domestic product, which measures every money transaction for goods and services. But have you ever noticed a thing about economists? They don't care a damn why money is exchanged hands. Doesn't matter. All they want is that money changes hands. That adds to the GDP. And you know that every politician will turn somersaults to keep the GDP growing, because that's the indication of how well we've done. But wait a minute now. Do you know that when the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened, the American GDP rose by $2 billion? That's what you spent that year cleaning up the oil? By the criterion of just GDP going up, we ought to spill oil all over the damn place. It's good for us. You know, we have this situation in Canada where we have the biggest nuclear plant, Darlington, right next to the biggest city in Canada, Toronto. Now, to me, that strikes me as lunacy. But they say, no, we're not like those Russian engineers, never have an accident. Our system is foolproof. Well, you know what a foolproof system is, right? It's a system free of fools. Now, who among us has never fallen in love and lost 60 IQ points right off the bat? I mean, we go to a party, we get drunk, we come in the next day hungover, we get the flu, but we keep going to work. All kinds of things happen where we become fools at some point in our workday. There is no such thing as a foolproof technology unless you remove the fools. But suppose that this unthinkable happens. Darlington vents a huge cloud of radioactive gas, floats over Toronto. Thousands of people develop radiation sickness. Well, that's great. I mean, the GDP will rise. We need ambulances, nurses, flowers, doctors, and no doubt thousands of lawyers. All of that adds to the GDP. And then if dozens of people begin to die of radiation sickness, well, we need caskets, flowers, grave diggers, hearses. All of that adds to the GDP. And then if you say to Darlington, you've got to clean up this mess, the billions they spend cleaning it up, all of that goes to add to the GDP. What a great indicator this is. By that criterion, an ecological disaster turns into a wonderful economic benefit. And finally, this economy is based on the notion that the best thing to ever hit the planet was human beings. We're so bright. We're so creative. There's no limit to human inventiveness. So, there can be no limit to the economy, because the economy is built on human creativity and productivity. So, we have built a system that actually says steady growth forever is not only possible, but it's necessary. If you have a candy store in Austin, and 15% of everybody in Austin shops in your candy store, you're making money, and you say, gee, this is great. I'm making enough money. I know everybody in my candy store, but I need to upgrade the store. So I go to the bank, tell the bank manager, I need a loan to improve my facilities, but I don't want to grow anymore. Just want to stay where I am. You know that you won't get a loan? Because in our business system, if you're not growing, you're considered dead or dying. Now, we live in a finite world. How can we have a system built on the notion of steady growth forever? Anything growing steadily over time, as you know, is called exponential growth. So whatever is growing, the amount of garbage you make, the amount of water you use, the amount of land you develop, anything growing exponentially will double in a predictable time. If it's growing at 1% a year, it'll double in 70 years. 2% a year, double in 35 years. 3% in 24 years. 4% in 18 and a half years. Anything growing exponentially has a doubling time. I'm going to give you a system analogous to the Earth, a test tube full of food for bacteria. Put one bacterial cell in, and every minute it's going to divide. That's exponential growth, okay? So, at time 0 at the beginning, there's one cell. 1 minute, there are 2. 2 minutes, there are 4. 3 minutes, there are 8. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely full of bacteria, and there's no food left, okay? So when is the test tube half full or half empty, depending on whether you're an optimist or pessimist? And of course, the answer is at 59 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's only 50% full. But 1 minute later, it'll be full. So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. 57 minutes is 12.5% full. At 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes a bacterium said to the other guys, hey, I've been thinking, we've got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, what the hell are you smoking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty, and we've been around for 55 minutes. They'd be 5 minutes away from filling it. So, bacteria are no smarter than humans. 59 minutes, they go, oh my God, we've got a problem. We got 1 minute left. Okay, mega project, give that money to the scientists, the engineers, the genetic engineers, and the computer guys, and by God, those scientists do it. In less than a minute, they create 3 test tubes full of food for bacteria. So they quadruple the amount of food. So what happens? 60 minutes, first test tube's full. 61 minutes, second's full. 62 minutes, all 4 are full. So by quadrupling the amount of food in space, you buy 2 extra minutes. And I absolutely guarantee you, no scientific mega project is going to give us more or increase the amount of air, water, soil, or biodiversity on this planet. The vast majority of biologists I talk to believe we are long past the 59th minute in that cycle of exponential growth. Well, you can say, well, how can we have all this wealth? I mean, we're flying all over the place. Look at the stuff we can buy in the stores. How can you say that we're past the 59th minute? Well, the reason is we're doing something any junior accountant would tell you is suicidal. We're eating into our capital. We're using up our biological capital. And we think that this is what progress is. But that biological capital rightfully belongs to our children and grandchildren. But we're using it up. And sooner or later, you come to the end. We've already come to the end in many areas. I'm not going to recite the litany, just one that we're dealing with in British Columbia. The catastrophic collapse of the marine fisheries is being felt around the world. We have the illusion that everything's fine because most of the animals that you're eating from the oceans are farmed animals, farmed salmon, and there are all kinds of reasons why that's crazy. We are living in a time then where we're living in a fool's paradise, and all of our leaders who are telling us that we need more without ever facing how much do we need, why do we need all this stuff, and what lies ahead are just accelerating the suicidal path we're on. Now I'd like to just end with a message that came to us 10 years ago. Rachel Carson's warnings came 40 years ago. 10 years ago, a group of 1,500 senior scientists, including more than half of all Nobel Prize winners, released a document called World Scientists' Warning to Humanity. I don't know if you can zoom in on that. And let me just read you some of the words in it. Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to support life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. They then go on and list the areas of collision: the atmosphere, water, ocean, soil, forest, species, population. And then the message grows even more grim. No more than 1 or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. I remind you, over half of all Nobel Prize winners signed that document, 1,500 senior scientists from around the world. Now, it's a frightening document, even more frightening because 10 years have rushed by and we haven't deviated. But I'll tell you the most frightening aspect of all. None of the media paid any attention to it. None of the major American networks bothered to report it, And I know for a fact that both the Washington Post and the New York Times said this is not newsworthy and didn't bother to report it. So half of all Nobel Prize winners telling us we could have as little as 10 years to avoid an absolute catastrophe, and this is considered not newsworthy. I just want to remind you what these media do consider newsworthy. You remember a guy named O.J. Simpson? Do you remember Monica Lewinsky? I mean, the media were absolutely besotted with these events, which I know in the historical terms will not even register as a blip. And yet when major scientists around the world are telling us we face a catastrophe, this is not newsworthy. The challenge then for us is to get on with it. Let me conclude by saying this is what impelled me 2 years ago to look to see whether there are good news stories anywhere. And I hear Ray Anderson is in the crowd. Ray is one of the major success stories that I featured in a book called Good News for a Change, Hope for a Troubled Planet. Holly Dressel and I went around the world to look for good news stories. When we started, I thought, gee, I wonder if there are enough stories to make a book. Within 6 months, I realized we could have written volumes. The good news is there is good news all over the world at the level of individuals, companies, organizations, governments. Bits and pieces of good news are happening. The bad news is our so-called leaders don't seem to be interested in finding out examples of what can be done to get on with it. So now my foundation, which is a small organization called the David Suzuki Foundation, has launched what we call the Nature Challenge. We're going to the people now and saying, we've got to get on with it. We can't wait for our so-called leaders to show us the way. We've got to show by what we do that we want things to change. We work together with the Union of Concerned Scientists, a very prestigious American organization, to say where is it that we as individuals actually impact in a major way on nature. And it turns out there are 4 areas where individual consumers have a considerable impact. We impact climate, we impact water, air, and habitat. And the 3 activities or areas of our lives as individuals that impact most on this are where we live, our houses, how we heat and cool them, our food, and the way we transport ourselves. And again, the mayor blew me away by saying he runs a Prius. I bought the first Prius sold in Canada, gas-electric hybrid. There are ways for that we can have a significant impact by acting in these 3 areas of housing, food, and transportation. And we've come up with a list of 10 simple steps to make change. And we've called that the Nature Challenge. We are trying to get 1 million Canadians to take the pledge to commit to doing 3 out of the 10 things in the coming year. And many people look at it and say, oh, hell, I can do all 10 of them. They are deceptively simple and easy. I didn't bring copies of the Nature Challenge here. You can find it at davidsuzuki.org and look up the Nature Challenge. And you can find the Consumer's Green Guide at that website that will explain the science behind each of the 10 steps. But it's time for us to get on it. And I'll leave you with a story. Many years ago, a young American senator came to Canada, and I interviewed him for a radio program, and he sent shivers up my back with how well he understood the environmental crisis and what has to be done. And at the end of my interview, I put my microphone down and I said, Mr. Senator, what can people like me do to help politicians like you? And he said, don't look to politicians like me. He said, if you want change, you've got to sell it to the people. You've got to convince them there's a problem, show them that there are solutions, and get them concerned enough to demand change. Then he said anybody, even Newt Gingrich, could jump on the bandwagon and go for it. His name, of course, was Al Gore, and I have taken Al's advice to heart. The action begins with each one of us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I went a bit long, but I'm told that we could answer questions for 5 minutes or so if you have any questions. Ooh, it's a big audience. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm a very proud father. 10 years ago, my daughter, Severn, raised all the money to go to Rio and take 4 other children with her. And finally got a chance to address the entire plenary session at the Earth Summit in Rio and gave a galvanizing speech. She's now 22. She was 12 when she went. Just graduated from Yale in May. She's right now on a month tour of Japan, meeting youth in Japan to galvanize. She wants to eventually go into ethnobiology, but right now she seems to be a youth person. She sat on Kofi Annan's special committee to plan the Earth Summit at Johannesburg, and went to Johannesburg and is doing a television series show about the conference. She's 22. When she went as a child, she really had the belief that as a child, the simplicity of her message and the honesty of it. Like one of her lines that blew me away was, she said, "I'm only a child. I have no hidden agenda. You know, I'm fighting for my future, not a few points on the stock market or political office." This is a very profound statement. I think she is a very sadly disillusioned woman now, but she hasn't given up her ideals. She just realizes the world is much more complicated, and what she believed when she was 12 years old is considered naive and unrealistic. Yes? Thank you. Thank you. Did everyone hear that? So what he's saying is that part of the solution has got to be to discover our indigenous nature. That is, we are rooted to a place. It's just not, we can't go on like the New York City telephone book, half of the entries being changed every year because we're just floating around. We've become a very mobile species in the industrialized world. But then the question is, if we are to become more rooted to a place and develop our local solutions, how are we going to exchange that information to spread that around? Because we all have to learn from what's going on in different places. If that's an adequate summary of your question. The question is whether the Internet is one of the solutions. I have to tell you, I'm a Luddite when it comes to a lot of this technology. I've never believed that computers are going to replace teachers, for example. But having seen the power of the Internet, I am very, very impressed with its potential. And, you know, there are two things. One, we have a very popular television program, and it's a comedy show that deals with current events. And one of our up-and-coming leaders, who would be comparable to Newt Gingrich, I think, in the States, when he first became leader of his party, he said he wanted to be able to get a referendum put before the Canadian people by raising, getting 5% of the audience, the population signing the call for a referendum. And he thought that was a great idea. So these comedians, this man's name is Stockwell Day. These comedians asked people to register on the Internet for a referendum to change Stockwell Day's name to Doris. And within a week, he had 1.5 million people signed up. That's when I realized how powerful the Internet can be. And that's why, as a part of our nature challenge, we couldn't possibly print up a million of the forms that we now are distributing across the country. But through the internet, I think we've got a damn good chance of hitting 1 million people. And I've already got a very large group in Australia that would like to gather 500,000 Australians. And after the Sacred Balance runs in the United States, I hope we can start a program like that perhaps in the United States. Yes, the internet is certainly on. The Friends of the Earth Holland years ago calculated how many long airplane trips could a Dutch person take in his lifetime and still be within the sustainable level, that is, where the carbon dioxide could be taken out by nature. And what they found was that a Dutch person could take, on average, 1 long plane trip in a lifetime. That's how unsustainable all our flying around is. This year, I took a very big step. I'm part of a very large funding organization called Pew, and we do a lot of evaluating of grants. And as a reward, the Pew board is taken to some very wonderful place in tropical countries for a week, and we just have a good time. And I finally just said, I can't do it in all conscience. I can't generate that much carbon dioxide just to go down and have a good time. And my own flight use has been way over the sustainable level, and we've got to cut that back for sure. But I don't know if that's a downer, but we have to become more indigenous. Gary Snyder, a poet in San Francisco, is a big pusher of that indigenousness. He says when a developer comes into your community, says I have a 10 or 15-year development plan, you tell them, come back when you have a 500-year development plan, because we're here to stay. Thank you very much.